Welcome to Paper Cuts and Plot Twists, where the paper is dangerous and the plots are twisted.
Paper cuts, what's the risk? Just another day in the life, just another plot twist. But is it a tragedy, a comedy, romantasy, just another fantasy? It's paper cuts and plot twists. The rest we'll wait and see.
We made it to episode 4. I feel like we should celebrate with cake, and I know just the person. Remember Christina from episode 2 on fantasy? She's taking her baking to the next level. Gosh, I'm already distracted like Homer Simpson for a donut. Any whoozy whatsy, this is Paper Cuts and Plot Twists, episode 4 of a 10-episode season. We release a new episode every other week. In this episode, I love hating you. But not really you, don't worry. In the last 3 episodes, we've discussed moral dilemma, fantasy, and history. And plot twist, it's not what you expect. There's a reason readers come back to these types of stories. Today, we're talking and discussing how tension works in stories by looking at its application in my favorite, the rom-com. With that, let's get started. Tension in storytelling is necessary. In rom-com, the hate-to-love trope gets mixed emotions, with people either loving or hating it, ironically. It exists like an accelerant on a bonfire. It maximizes tension between two characters, leaving the reader wondering, will they or won't they? The trope has existed for a while, but is popularized in rom-coms today. We'll look at a few novels such as Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice and Laclos' Les Liaisons, Dangereuses, which inspired the iconic movie Cruel Intentions, Sally Thorne's The Hating Game, Jenny Han's To All the Boys I've Loved Before, Lynn Painter's Better Than the Movies. We'll touch on these and a few others for reference. Shout out to subscriber and friend Chris at Positively Chris on X, who stated his favorite hate to love combo were in A Fish Called Wanda, which I need to rewatch, and The Grapes of Wrath. Still waiting for that context, Chris. Before we dive in, let's check in with what's happening in the press and with a post of one of our subscribers. Stay tuned. This commercial break is really a way for me to say thank you. Thank you to the listeners of this podcast, the King Ari Press readers, our supporters, and our subscribers. You help make it possible to publish books like Annabelle's Lion by Tony Baker, Truth, A Story of Canry New West by Mary Ransom, and our most recent book, Daughter of God the Orphan by Rich Kopaz. Your support matters. Thank you. And if you haven't subscribed to our newsletter, you may do so at kingaripress.com. That is KINGARIPRESS.com. Now it's time I like to shout out one of our subscribers. And in this episode, it is the Red-Headed Rebel. On X, you can find her at _Redheaded Rebel. That's REDHEADEDREBEL. On March 22nd, she posted, "Gardeners, listen up. If you haven't made a bean teepee, you're missing out. These are fun for the kids or grandkids, and it's not so bad as an adult. I grew one year using morning glory flowers. They're a fun piece in your garden and make picking a little more interesting. All you need are some bamboo poles, and I recommend a strong gauge of wire to tie them." This is my thank you to Red-Headed Rebel for continuing to inspire me on all these gardening exploits. I actually saved this one because I really do want to make a bean pole tea pole. I think you know what I'm trying to say. Maybe not. A bean teepee tea pole? I don't know if that's right. Anyways, thank you for that. Thank you for supporting me and subscribing, Red-Headed Rebel. And if you would like to check out more of her posts, please go to X and follow her there. Now, back to the episode. In the 1999 rom-com 10 Things I Hate About You, with Julia Stiles as Kat Strafford and Heath Ledger as Patrick Verona, we have a modern take on Shakespeare's The Taming of the Shrew. This rom-com epitomizes the hate-to-love trope in the best way possible, and it's Kat Strafford's poem to Patrick that I'd like to read for you now. "I hate the way you talk to me and the way you cut your hair. I hate the way you drive my car. I hate it when you stare. I hate your big, dumb combat boots and the way you read my mind. I hate you so much it makes me sick. It even makes me rhyme. I hate the way you are always right. I hate it when you lie. I hate it when you make me laugh. Even worse, when you make me cry. I hate it that you're not around and the fact that you didn't call. But mostly, I hate the way I don't hate you. Not even close. Not even a little bit. Not even at all. This poem paints a perfect picture of how the hate-love tension works between characters. It's this polarization of being both far away and close at the same time. We see it mostly between romantic characters, or they will once they get over their hatred. But it can work in the frenemy area. What if, like, Lex Luthor and Superman became friends? That sort of thing. But why does this tension work so well in a story? In Pride and Prejudice, it shows growth. This tension between Elizabeth and Darcy tends towards the romantic, but actually it's used for their growth, especially Elizabeth as we see this story unfold before her eyes. She sees Mr. Darcy with more clarity and charity toward the end without the expectation of his returned affection. And we keep reading because our eyes are opened as well. And for the hopeless romantic, we dare to dream that they will be married by the end of the story. An interesting twist on the I Love Hating You is from Cruel Intentions, which was inspired by the aforementioned French book. Cruel Intentions, Catherine and Sebastian's hatred is actually of an ideal, the representation of good in the ingenue Annette, who they attempt to corrupt. That is, until Sebastian falls for Annette. I also mentioned a couple other rom-com books that use the hate to love trope. Sally Thorne's The Hating Game, Jenny Han's To All the Boys I Loved Before, Lynn Painter's Better Than the Movies. And in Sally Thorne's The Hating Game, it's right there in the title. The opening chapter starts with the premise that love and hate are disturbingly similar. You have these visceral symptoms in both. The character Lucy goes on to say that both love and hate are a mirror versions of the same game you have to win. To give some clarity, this book's also made into a movie, and they work in an office together. And Lucy's character, she hates her counterpart, this guy, and kind of like 10 Things I Hate About You, you get the sense of like all the things that she hates, but then you start to realize that hate is similar to kind of this infatuation with somebody, and you don't necessarily, you feel uncomfortable around them, and you can feel that way with love too. So there's like that kind of, that visceral feeling that she's talking about. So I think that's interesting how love and hate do have similar feelings. Like your stomach could be upset, or um, your fixation on that person even. They say that the opposite of love isn't really hate. And in some ways, what we're talking about here is that love and hate are kind of really close together in some ways. There's tension for sure between them, but there's some similarities between them. That the real opposite of love is apathy. It's where you don't care at all. So hate has some caring to it in an ironic way. And in that book, The Hating Game, you kind of get that sense a little bit of what that looks like. Then there's Jenny Han's To All the Boys I've Loved Before and Painter's Better Than the Movies. Now, what's interesting about these books is that you kind of have the mix of the boy next door or girl next door, vice versa. In this case, it's boy next door, and the hate to love. This kind of is blending a little bit of this, but I think this is really interesting. It is the hate to love trope with the boy next door. And I think the reason that this work is it's partly fueled by misunderstanding. It's fueled by growing up and growing apart. And your world's kind of like you knew each other when you were younger, you kind of go apart, and then you you kind of hate each other, or you have reason to, or something happened in the past and you can't get over it. But then it turns to love in the end because you start to see that person in a new way, or maybe you rediscover that person. Maybe that's what the boy next door has to offer, is that you don't really know why you started hating them and you just didn't give them a chance, or a lot of things can get in the way. So interesting that it's kind of a similar trope. And To All the Boys I Loved Before was what's actually kind of working in there is that she writes these love letters to get over her love for that person. And so writing the letter is kind of writing them off. And she like shouldn't love them. Or in the case of Peter, where, this is where the affection goes, or the hate goes to love, is that Peter K, she talks in the letter all about the ways that she doesn't like him, and the reason she's like trying to convince herself of all the reasons why she shouldn't like him. And she focuses on that in her letter to him. And then these letters get sent out much later, many years later. And these guys find out about this letter, and Peter K, who becomes the love interest, but is kind of and hate is maybe a little bit too strong here. It's like a soft version of hate, dislike. Um, and it has a lot to do with like how they set it up. And so they kind of start fake dating. So even though that's not the strongest hate to love, it's kind of a subdued version of that. And the whole point is the tension. So here's the thing. These are kind of like these tension between how do I want to say this? This tension between characters, especially romantic ones, works in rom-coms for sure. Tension works in story. Tension is king. And that's why my belief is that in particular, tension works through this catharsis, this balance. We have this emotional catharsis. The reader, we're working through that emotional catharsis. And there's this balancing between our feelings, because I think we feel in tension love and hate. And maybe we don't even call things hate, or we don't even call things love. But when you put it in a story, the author is dealing with those in extremes. And the tension is written in a way that the reader understands, because it's the turmoil of those feelings for the reader. That's the catharsis. But the author is dealing with that tension, or using that tension in the more extreme ways. Like maybe you don't hate somebody all the time. So of course in the story, it doesn't, real life maybe doesn't pair that closely to like, I hated him forever and then I loved him. I mean, maybe it does. I don't know. Maybe that's your story. But the thing I think that's important about this is that love and hate, it's the extreme measure of that to this outer layer. And you're turning that on its head. So you start in one and then you flip it on the other side. And what's interesting is if we go back to talking about like comedy and tragedy, in a sense, that's kind of what it's doing. Like comedy and tragedy usually start on opposite ends, and then they flip, and then they end at the other side of the story. So like in comedy, it starts out pretty tragic, and then, whoa, everything he lost, he got back in the end, and it ends in a marriage and everybody's happy. In tragedy, it's like he's on top of the world and it just gets worse and worse and worse, and then he loses everything. So in the same way that love and hate works in that extreme, and you're flipping it. And that's kind of how comedy and tragedy work too. So that polarization, I think, is very helpful in telling a story. It keeps readers interested. That's obviously one. This particular trope within romantic comedies, the love to hate, is used often in sitcoms, in rom-com movies. It's very popular. And as I said before, there are some people that really love the trope and some people that really hate the trope. I understand the trope, or let's put it this way. I understand why Jane Austen is using it in Pride and Prejudice. I understand why the tension is there. It doesn't have to be like we showed in To All the Boys I Loved Before, and then even what I was saying, Painter's book, Better Than the Movies. I think it's a boy next door story, and he annoys her because he's like they're fighting over a parking spot, I think is how it goes. It's been a little bit. Um, and I just want to tell you briefly one of the reasons why this kind of resonates is when I met my husband. I was in well, I had seen him before this, but there's an incident where I was in a computer lab and I was talking to we had like brother sister floors, so there was this guy that I knew from another dorm, and our floors would hang out together. It was a Bible college, so it was not co-ed, not at that time either. Just saying. So it was a unique experience. If you haven't had that experience, we did not have co-ed dorms. Anyways, he was a really nice guy, and I remember I was talking to him. I don't even remember what it was about, but we're just in the computer lab. I don't know if I was in there. Maybe I was checking email or something. And I was talking to him. So my husband at that time, of course, I didn't really know him. He was annoyed by me because I was talking and he was trying to write a paper, and he was super annoyed. And I think he remembered me. And I still talk a lot. So apologies to the people that know me, but I really annoyed him. And ironically, like I had no idea. He never told me this. And obviously didn't I didn't hate him, he didn't hate me, but it was just I annoyed him. I didn't know that I annoyed him, but yeah, I was talking in the computer lab while he was trying to finish a paper, but we didn't know each other, and a way leads to way, and anyways, we're married and everything worked out, but there were moments. And so what a story does, like in the books that we've just mentioned, is they take that and they extrapolate a scene, a moment, and they extrapolate it out through the whole story and tell that pivotal moment where the character realizes, I don't really hate them. I love them. And everything that I was feeling before, I don't feel that way. They're actually much better than I ever imagined. And I think that that's kind of the key is the author is holding that tension for you, but the reader has hope that it can be redeemed. And now there's always going to be within the story, there's always going to be glimmers of that because the reader will see things possibly if depending on how the author writes the story, but the reader may see what the character does not. In Pride and Prejudice, sometimes what we get is Elizabeth's doubts of her prejudice towards Darcy. And you get her attention of Darcy, or you notice his attention of her, and you get curious about that. There's like mystery. He's kind of mysterious, and you get Elizabeth's curiosity about him, but you also get her frustration and her prejudice towards him. And then obviously he makes the worst proposal to her that he could possibly make, which is just it infuriates her, and yet she can't really let it go. It plays on something that I think you under like as a reader you understand a little bit of the attention that she gives is because she has interest. And this is where love and hate is like it's as close and as far as it can be. So I find those things fascinating. I really do like rom-coms as because I'm a hopeless romantic. I love a good comedy. I like the story to end well. I'm all about that love. And so when you have that hate turn to love, oh, just gets me every time. But truthfully, from a writer's perspective, from a reader's perspective, we like tension in stories. It does not have to be this trope, but from an extreme point of view, love and hate is both close, really close together on how it feels emotionally, and really far apart on how the characters respond to the other person. Like your actions towards them have different results. And that's what makes the difference between love and hate. Like what you're going to do to the person, the action towards the person, even if emotionally they kind of, the pit in the stomach feels the same, or the flushed face or whatever, whatever the physical ramifications are on how you feel towards that person, your actions towards the person are very different. And so the transformation of that, I think, is really fascinating. So, with that said, I want to next introduce our guest, Sherilyn Pratt. She's the author of several books. So I am so excited for her to be here and share a little bit about what she wants to say on this topic. So Sherilyn Pratt, she's author of several books, and one of them is including the Pimpernel series, The Kid That Launched 1,000 Gifts. You may say GIFs. I say gifts. So I don't know where we're at on that. So please don't hate me if you say it the other way, and love me if you say it the way I just said it. See what I did there? And then she also wrote The King of the Friend Zone. They're all available on Amazon, those books and others. So you can also find her at Sherilyn Live as Sip Happens on X. Here's what she has to say.
Did Joan Jett say it best when she said, "I hate myself for loving you. I can't break free from the things that you do. I want to walk, but I run back to you. That's why I hate myself for loving you." Or did Juliet say it best when she said, "Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo? Deny thy father, and refuse thy name, or, if thou wilt not, be but sworn, my love, and I'll no longer be a Capulet." The enemies to lovers, or the hate to love you trope, is such a fun one across time. I'm pretty sure it exists everywhere, and probably best in fiction. It's probably best that the hate to love you trope isn't everywhere in the world all the time, because it's very fiery, it's very dynamic, it's very toxic. Because in the hate to love you trope, the thing that you don't have is rose-colored glasses, right? You're not looking at the person you're attracted to with romantic eyes. You're looking at them like, worst case scenario. No, this cannot be happening. Brain says no, 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 no. And yet the heart, like the part of you that just wakes up in the morning and thinks a thought, it all goes this other direction. And you're stuck in the middle saying like, oh no, which way do I go? The smart way or the one that feels like gravity? Right? Like, which one do I do and why? And this is the fun journey of the hate to love you trope, right? When the mind says no and the heart says yes. And the writer in me kind of wants to point out that there's 3 rules to this genre, to getting it right, to getting it fiery, to getting it fun, to getting it for a memorable story across time that is just really good fiction. And I'll add as a side note, not one of the rules, that I do think that the higher the stakes of a story, the better the enemies to lovers trope plays. You know, on one end of the scale, you have like Pride and Prejudice. You have Elizabeth Bennet and Darcy, right? And how he is raised to want a certain type of woman and a certain caliber of woman in a certain type of manner at a certain level of status, right? And that is what he is bred to do and is looking to do. And then all of a sudden you have Elizabeth Bennet. And against all his better judgment and all his breeding, he says, I want her. So on the lower stakes, it kind of looks like that. And then as you get up into higher stakes, you have things like enemy families and spies or warring clans, people with a long history of violence where it's like you have that Romeo and that Juliet story, right? Where it's like, it's time to heal. You know, like feuds can't last forever. Sometimes love wins and sometimes it's a tragedy as well. So that's the importance of the trope, right? Is that it does cross bridges. So I really love this topic and I'm really, really looking forward to what Stephanie has to say on the matter. So without further ado, Stephanie, tell me, what do you love about the hate to love you genre or the enemies to lovers genre? What would your 3 rules be for a strong enemies to lovers, hate to love you, perfect fiction genre?
Thank you, Sherilyn. To answer your question, I love how tension works in the story, as I mentioned. And what I didn't say before, it's the redemption that transforms those characters from hate to love. Love is an ever-conquering thing. Love is the redeeming quality, and we all need more of it. That's probably my favorite part of the love to hate, or hate to love. I hate loving you. Thank you all for just joining us on this episode. This is episode 4. I can't believe we've done this. I'm really, really, really happy to talk about this with you all. My goal really has just been to engage with why we really love these stories. Storytelling has been around from the beginning. We're humans. We love to tell stories. It's biblical. Like, Jesus was all about the parable, man. He loved it. He loved using parables to tell stories, to share truths with people. We've been telling stories around the fireside, poets singing our words, remembering and teaching our children songs so they can remember their histories. We have dreamed of fantasies and worlds beyond our own. We have this hope for this world that just transforms from the world that we know. We desire for that better thing. When we see something broken, we imagine this better and more beautiful thing. And this moral dilemma that we have, we've talked about that. And this is why I think this love to hate, hate to love, it usually doesn't work. I mean, I suppose, yes, you write stories where it's love to hate, but hate to love. That part I like, redemption. When we see somebody for the first time, they always say, like, your first impression of somebody. And if you don't make a good first impression, that's it. That's over. Well, the hate to love totally challenges that. Because what if you see somebody and you're like, I don't like them? But what if as you get to know them, you're like, oh, they're not as bad as I thought they were. Actually, they're really cool. I want to be their friend. And C.S. Lewis, another favorite, I think I brought him up on every episode so far, as one should. C.S. Lewis wrote The Four Loves, and he talks about familiarity, familiarity love. This idea that, like, a baby would see the neighbor, and every time the baby sees the neighbor, it becomes more and more familiar, more trustworthy of that neighbor, and will smile after several times of seeing the neighbor, would start to smile and recognize. And I think that's also what happens in this genre, is that what you didn't understand, what you didn't know, what you didn't see about that person, the more exposure you have to the whole person, because the person isn't a culmination of their worst aspects, I hope. And this hate to love kind of proves that, or is, and I don't mean proving it like as a fact. I mean, it's the process of proving this idea that through knowledge, through experience, that you can transform from one, I didn't like this person, to, wow, I really love this person. And I feel like, and not even romantic love, but just having that redemptive view of people, that they can be better and more than what you thought they were, believing in people that they can be more and better, putting on eyes of love towards somebody, like to love who they are and who they might become, and to champion the good, and seeing the good instead of the bad. I think that's what compels me about this. So I guess, Sherilyn, to answer your question, I think that's what compels me about this. It's so much more than just romantic love, but I think we see that most in the rom-coms. They use that. But hey, I challenge, if you are a writer listening to the podcast today, think about that more. Think about the arc of hate to love non-romantically. How is it used even in subtle ways, like we see in, the boy next door transformation? Like, you can just use it in small parts. But what if it's a friend, or what if it's your parents or your grandparents, or the parents to their kids, or a neighbor, somebody, that the curmudgeon neighbor that you didn't like, and you start doing something nice for them, and you see them as a real person. That transformation, I think, is beautiful. So figure out what you hate and see how you might love it. Maybe a new food. I do that sometimes. Okay, that was a long ending. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to our podcast again. I'm so glad that we were able to finish episode 4. Look forward to dropping episode 5 in 2 weeks. So we'll see you then. Have a great day.